wanted to wipe out 4 or 5 executive departments, and he couldn't name them all. He was laughed off the stage. That was the end of Perry. This time around, we have Cruz, the sallow-faced hypocrite, who says, I want to wipe out 4, and he says the Department of Commerce, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Commerce and Energy. There we go, 4. Or maybe he wanted to give us 5. So by rights, Cruz should be driven off the podium because of his idiotic methods there. The other funny thing, as some commentators have pointed out, they all want the flat tax. Flat tax means tax cuts for the rich. Haven't you had enough of that? Trickle-down economics? And they lie. Generally speaking, their tax breaks for the rich add up to about $1 trillion a year. So $1 trillion more in the deficit. This is from the party that has been screaming about the deficit since 2008, right? Because their privileges are under attack. The other thing is when Trump says, I don't want immigration coming in, right? I hate the aliens, as he puts it. He does this, he says, because I don't want your wages to be driven down. Well, if you care about anybody's wages, Trump, why don't you advocate an increase in the minimum wage? Because that increase will essentially shift the entire wage scale upwards. It'll be a boon to so many people who have no idea of these connections, but they will be the beneficiaries. Another piece of idiocy, the Bank of America. If Bank of America is going to fail, Cruz, what would you do? Let it go bankrupt, let it bring down the entire system, have a total world depression. No. There's lots of other paths, right? You don't have to bail out Bank of America. You seize it. You nationalize it. You take control and you say, guess what? All the derivatives are shredded, deleted, abrogated, burned, whatever you want. No more derivatives. So the other thing about this I have to mention, right? They hate philosophy. It's not a surprise, right? Here, where the monsters from the id are on parade, right? Trump has long been recognized as a big id. Carson is an id of a different type. Rand Paul, of course. The commentators figure that Rand Paul and Kasich will both drop through trapdoors in the stage, right? Like the Tales of Hoffman in most productions, right? They're just going to go down, and that's going to be the end of them. But philosophers, right? Rubio says we need more welders and fewer philosophers. I can see why he says that. I mean, philosopher today generally is consumer fraud, but the idea of a philosopher, say a Plato, we could really use such a person here in the United States. We need Platonic philosophers, right? And Rubio says no. The other one with Cruz says the people running the Federal Reserve are a group of philosopher kings, by which he means that to be derogatory, that it's bad to be a philosopher king. So the Republican Party, monsters from the id, everyone, go on record against Plato, because that's what it is, the philosopher kings, Plato Republic. So they are despicable. Don't have anything to do with them. And if you find that attractive, you're depraved. Back in a minute. Here in our final segment of our program for Friday, the 13th of November, 2015. Let's look at the Iowa debate, right? We've gone through the monstrosities, right? The monsters from the id at the Republican debate, right? The dark places of the American mind being accessed in the way that old Joe McCarthy used to. The debate is in Iowa on Saturday night. That is Saturday, the 14th of November. It's going to be on CBS. I would urge people, if you're in Iowa, you should show up with signs. You should find where Chris Matthews or whoever else is pontificating. Get in the shot, right? Get behind them. Do what we did at the inauguration in 2012 when we had our Wall Street sales tax right in the faces of all the CNN viewers, because we camped out precisely where they had their cameras set up. I would say to Martin O'Malley, if you want to have any hope of getting anywhere, you should forget about this attack on Bernie as not a real Democrat. Forget that. No traction there. O'Malley, talk about Bernie and the Saudis. play the Saudi card, the Saudi atrocities card, the Saudi crucifixions and beheadings and other monstrosities, right? Mutilations, cutting off people's hands and feet. The Saudis are guilty of genocide in Yemen. They're cutting off food to the entire country. Millions of people are on the verge of actually dying. Then we've got these charming Saudi political executions, including the guy who just won the Sakharov Prize of the European Parliament, threatened to have his head chopped off. Could happen any hour. Could overtake me during the course of the show. Jubair, this character we had here in Washington, right? He's the guy who said, oh, the Iranians tried to kill me. Nonsense. That was MEK, right? Mujahideen Khalq, CIA. That's Jubair. Jubair now says, if you don't get Assad out of there, we'll remove him with military means. Well, that's pretty dangerous talk. So here we have a Dark Ages absolute monarchy. Bernie loves it. What a social democrat he is. And, of course, the status of women is a monstrosity. So, O'Malley, somebody confront Bernie Sanders on his seamless, stubborn support for the Dark Ages monarchy of Saudi Arabia. He wants to make them the gendarme of the Middle East. They make the Middle East safe for imperialism in Bernie's system. So I just urge anybody of goodwill, I think one or two people may be on their way to Iowa tomorrow evening. Get some signs out there. The signs should say, Bernie, condemn your Saudi friends and their beheadings and crucifixions. Or Bernie, condemn Saudi genocide in Yemen. Those are your friends. So, and of course, the tax question, well, we know the answer to that. It's a 1% Wall Street sales tax. That's the answer to all of these Republicans. So we're going to see what that looks like. Generally speaking, Bernie now seems to regret the fact that he gave Hillary that pass on her emails. Now he's whining that was a mistake. Well, Bernie, you are inept. And the other thing people are noting, right, is he's not getting any black support. There's a lily white campaign, always a bad thing. And as long as Bernie is railing against the 1% of billionaires, or whatever they are, the billionaire class, that sounds okay. Although there are no specifics, zero specifics on any of that. He lacks detail. He doesn't come up with the specs. And as soon as you get him on foreign policy, he's a disaster. He's a warmonger in a party that has spent the last 12 years talking about nothing but the great questions of war and peace, which was correct to do. Okay, now, if the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, we're going to have a situation where there's no QE, no quantitative easing. The money supply will not be in an expansive phase. And if they start raising interest rates, hold on to your hat. There'll be no Santa Claus rally this year. There's going to be some kind of a sickening downturn. Notice the Portuguese government. The Portuguese government elected 50+%, came in there and they said, look, we want to get out of NATO. We want to get out of the EU. We want to end austerity above all. So the president of the republic says, sorry, I'm not allowing you to form the government. I'm only going to use reactionaries. Some action in Catalonia to break up Spain. That's a British operation from beginning to end. And most of these things in Europe are that. Anybody talking secessionism in Europe, get your head examined on that one too. Ted Koppel, remember him? Nightline, otherwise known as Night Lies. He says there's going to be a cyber attack on the U.S. and that there is no plan. He says that the Secretary of Homeland Security, J. Johnson, has no plan. Well, I'm thinking back now to 2001, and right after 9/11, within those couple of weeks, I can remember that Koppel did a couple of programs about bio-warfare, germ warfare, and that was immediately followed by the anthrax attacks. And remember, as long as people are crashing into skyscrapers in the middle of the biggest city, there are hundreds of millions of people that say, that's not going to come to me. But sure enough, every time you went to your mailbox, which a lot of people do every day, and you look in there and you find, oh, my God, are there spores? What is there here? So Classical terrorism, probably too focused, too narrow to keep people's attention. I mentioned the fact that the British are on some kind of a rampage. Again, the British are typically trying to take advantage of what they think is the collapse of the U.S. to try to rebuild some kind of British bloc or British sphere. Don't join it is all I can tell people. Now, concerning the Malthusian campaign, that is coming up also. We're going to have this Paris conference. The Paris conference starts now within, 2 weeks approximately, a little bit more. And that's going to be the Paris Malthusian conference about global warming and other obfuscations. Here we have again the case of evil doing good. And evil in this case is Secretary John Skull and Bones Kerry, who has been pointing out that the United States will not accept a legally binding agreement coming out of this Paris conference. So that essentially puts this whole thing into its proper perspective as an exercise in posturing and futility, because there will be no binding agreement. Hollande and Fabius are freaking out. Fabius also, I think, because one of his relatives has been indicted by the U.S., right? There's a whole thing going on about who's taking part in what drug transactions. And again, I know a lot of people, they immediately jump to the conclusion that the U.S. is always the worst. Maybe the U.S. is not always the worst, right? Maybe we should actually try to see what's going on. Anyway, you had it all, right? The Catholic bishops, no meat, no salami for you. We had the World Health Organization, no meat, no salami. The Catholic bishops say no coal and no oil. That would kill millions, more than millions, maybe hundreds of millions. And the Keystone Pipeline is rejected. This is all absolutely absurd. This is the politics of the surreal. And we're even told that Hollywood is now worried about an HIV positive actor who may have infected a lot of them. So you can look on Twitter and see who everybody thinks this is. Finally, let's say something about what's going on certain campuses, right? The University of Missouri, Yale, Wesleyan, Ithaca College, and so forth. We're now in the world of political correctness and multiculturalism. I would say anybody who's on a campus, any student who's in a full-time university is actually enjoying some kind of a privilege. And if you're getting a scholarship, you certainly are. And if you got this through any kind of special dispensation, any kind of affirmative action, then I think you have to consider that you're getting some privilege. However, some people feel they can't get along without a grievance, and therefore they have invented these things called microaggressions. I would say, look at the million student march this week. It's on 12th of November, $15 rate, end of debt. I think that's better than demands raised at Missouri. There are no class-based demands whatsoever. So I'm for demonstrations with class-based demands. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.